And with that being said, that's going to lead us perfectly into our album review of the week. So I think I mentioned this last week on the show that we're going to be reviewing Duel by Jinjer. I got a chance to see them live a little more than a couple weeks ago. And I wanted to talk about their most recent album. Again, I'll be reviewing new albums along with some that have been released in the past, roughly 18 months that are, most recent for some big groups out there. This album was released on February 7th, 2025. So yeah, I wanted to talk about how they sound on record since I just talked about how they sounded live. Firstly, for those who don't know, Jinjer is a Ukrainian metalcore band that began back in 2008. In 2009, vocalist Tatiana Shmayluk joined the band along with current guitarist Roman um, Ibram Khalilov. Ibram Khalilov. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. In 2011, bassist Eugene Abdukhanov, hope I got that right as well, joined. And then in 2016, they got a new drummer, Vladi Ulasevich, and that makes up the group. Prior to this album, they have released 5 other albums, including Inhale, Do Not Breathe in 2012, Cloud Factory in 2014, King of Everything, which I think that really kind of put them on the map, and that was in 2016, Macro in 2019, Wallflowers in 2021, and then now Duel. They have 567,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, 686,000 on YouTube Music. Talking about Tati a little bit. I mean, she really has everything from incredible clean highs to the absolute filthiest of gutturals and screams. She's actually the person I credit the most for getting me into metalcore and becoming a fan of screaming in general. I 3-4 years ago, I listened to some of that music, and now I have friends who listen to all kinds of different genres, but especially in rock and metal, they listen to some different stuff too. Some that are classic rock fans, some that are older metal fans with like Metallica or Megadeth stuff in the 80s and 90s and whatnot. And then I have some people who are fans of modern day stuff. And for the longest time, I could never really get into screaming, and I think the biggest thing was, I can't, it's frustrating because I really can't understand what they say. As you know, I really do try to do the best I can to dive into, what maybe they're trying to convey through their music. I don't have all the answers, but I do the best I can with that. And not being able to understand what they're saying is kind of like, oh, this is a little frustrating. I do like it, but it's almost a little bit too loud for me. And then I listened to her, and firstly, I was blown away with how dynamic she is in terms of how high she can get on her clean vocals and how beautiful they can sound, but also how deep she can get and how low she can get with her growls and her screams. But she almost does it in a way where you can actually understand what's being said, and I really appreciated that. And it kind of opened my eyes and opened my mind to listening to some different kind of music like this. And I'm really glad it did because I truly appreciate so much different subgenres in metal now. And yeah, she deserves massive credit for getting me into that. So with that being said, enough about me and whatnot with that. Let's go ahead and get into this album. So we start off with the opening track, which is Tantrum. We immediately get into it with a blast beat on the drums and into the harsh vocals with Tati. I have so much respect for drummers, especially those that are so quick with the bass drum. I genuinely like. I was a runner in high school and did a cross country, and I don't do it as much now, but like you have to have such strong legs to not completely just die out there, especially when it comes to this kind of music. So Vlad Ulasevich is incredible with that for sure. Getting into a little bit of what the song might be about. She talks about aristocracy and petty bourgeoisie. His Majesty speaks in agony as I show my motion, my rules are mine. Essentially, I don't adhere to those with power, and I'm going to do my own thing, fighting back against authority and expressing a level of individual freedom. Personal freedom is even mentioned later in the song. And I'll also say, I know that there are plenty of songs that they do this for, such as I Speak Astronomy, for example, but the bridge here and how it slows down and gets softer and more mellow is such an effortless, beautiful shift. Tati's cleans are some of the best in all of metal, and it's crazy to think that when she's more known for her screams and her gutturals. And that's something that the whole band has such a great lock on as well. I think this is a great opening track. It's lively and vigorous while also being groovy. From there, we move on to Hedonist. First thing I notice with this is just how heavy the bass is on this. Again, as I've mentioned before, I'm not a musician, so I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what Eugene is doing here. But I imagine some kind of drop tuning, whatever it is, it sounds great. You can really hear the rumble in it at the start here with that bass. This is another one that's groovy yet again, yet grungy at the same time. We have clean vocals from Tati, and then it shifts at deprivation in exchange for immortality. So I'm not going to lie here, but when she mentions, "But I am far from standing next to Desaad," I had to look up who Desaad was, and he was an 18th century French writer whose writings gave helped give rise to the term sadism, which is essentially getting pleasure from the pain and suffering from others. The term pleasure is mentioned various times in this song. I get the sense here this is about pleasure and using it in life as a distraction from the inevitable, which is death. But at the same time, it's important to maximize our enjoyment on this earth. As she mentions in the song, it's a natural human right. Now, the funny thing is, after I wrote this, I was thinking, I took a couple of college courses in philosophy, and I'm sure this is something that was brought up because hedonism is a philosophical term. And I probably spent 3 times that I needed on this song breaking down and dissecting it, as that I think the definition with pleasure and everything kind of goes along with the name of the song. But oh well, regardless, another really good track here to get the album rolling. From there, we move on to Rogue. A lot of aggression here as well. Big part of the song here, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed is a king, and then each despicable decision activates his dreadful nights. Take a listen, their mouths are fully loaded with his words, no thought of their own arose. Just kind of get from that alone, wartime vibes, dictatorial vibes maybe, how in war, a lot of people blindly trust their leaders and what they say or do what they say. Propaganda obviously playing a role here too, and that could be earlier in the song when she says the ugly rotten seeds. We also get themes of poverty with their bread tastes like rock as I'm drinking all the sewage of the damage they call help. These lyrics also just make me kind of made me think about poverty and people being forced to survive with inadequate food, water, or assistance. Whether that's exactly what Jinjer intended or whether it's meant more broadly as a criticism of just neglect and exploitation of people, that's kind of where my mind immediately went. But with the song, you just get this relentless, consistent force, and the gutturals continue all the way through, along with the heavy riffs. Definitely one of the more heavier songs on the album, and that's why I also say, the song is just super aggressive. The last thing I'll say is, with everything that has happened with the war between Ukraine and Russia, you also wonder how much this has to do with that. I believe the band is from the Donbass region, I believe it's called, which is where a lot of the conflict has been happening, and I know that Tatiana has not been able to go back home ever since really things have started there in 2022. So I wouldn't be surprised if this plays a role in that. I know other songs such as Home Back have obviously been about war and conflict over in that area too. So a really good song here though as well. From there, we go on to Tumbleweed. We definitely slow down a bit here for the first time, almost kind of an opposite from Rogue. The interesting thing is it still feels like we're talking about war here, though. As she mentions, "Have you heard of the storm that uprooted my home? A shower crushed down on my beautiful town." Get a sense that could be, drone strikes or bombs and whatnot. And I think that this just reflects, pure sadness of seeing parts of her country destroyed. So, to me, this, along with songs like Home Back, are anthems for anybody displaced by war or conflict. We do get more harsh vocals, starting with "I Turned Into Nothing" in the middle of the song, but the slower pace of the song in general just continues throughout. So definitely an interesting change here for sure. And from there, we move on to track number 5, which is a top 5, maybe top 3 Jinjer song of mine now already, and it's Green Serpent. I heard this live and was blown away. It's so beautiful. It's just incredible. I mean, the groove and the light start with a perfect transition into the heavier instrumentals and vocals, then back to super slow and light at the end again. I mean, this is a masterpiece. Super dynamic. And, I've talked about before on this podcast when it came to reviewing Dear God from The Pretty Reckless, overcoming addiction and the themes of that. I think we get that again here a little bit too. And I looked it up because immediately, there's a lot of relations to alcohol here, talking about the bottle and talk many things about addiction. So I was wondering how this relates to Tati, and I saw that she's been sober now for over 3.5 years. I think that's great. That deserves massive congratulations. Big part of the song, though, that made me realize this. It's not him who drinks from the bottle; it's the bottle that drinks from him. Essentially, alcohol consuming someone's life, rather they, and where they feel it's a necessity in certain settings. I love the chorus on this song here as well. It's again mind blowing how high and harmonic her clean voice can get, and we see that in the chorus with "Here it comes the green serpent." There's almost a twang to it as well, and it really just cuts through and shines through the instrumentals in the background. Again, it just mesmerizes me how good and controlled her voice can be. Then immediately after that, we get right back into harsh vocals before everything almost abruptly stops. We get the beautiful guitars and her clean vocals at the end, with the grapes are falling down. So really, really good song here. If I were introducing someone to Jinjer for the first time, this is probably the song I'd play. I know Pisces is the song that introduced a lot of people to the band, and for good reason, but it's actually not even one of my top five favorite Jinjer songs. More importantly, I think Pisces can actually be a bit overwhelming for someone who's brand new to the band because of just the dramatic contrast between Tatiana's beautiful cleans and those monstrous gutturals in the song. And that's part of what makes that song so iconic. And I think that has to do with what the song's about. But I actually think Green Serpent gives a more balanced representation of what Jinjer is as a band. You get the heaviness, the groove, the incredible instrumentals, and then both sides of Tatiana's vocal ability, but it's almost presented in a way that feels more consistent throughout the song. So if someone told me they wanted to understand what Jinjer's all about, this is probably where I'd start. It doesn't need to be stated this is a 12 out of 10 song. I would give it more than a 10 if I possibly could. From there, we go on to Kafka. And I will say, I know this is a song that a lot of people liked. I actually wasn't as big of a fan of this one. It wasn't necessarily my cup of tea. I did really like the last minute or so of this piece. It's another slow builder. The buildup with the drums is great, especially. We do finally pick up and get more aggressive when she says, the void will bleed das nix. I believe that's how you pronounce it in German. So that was, since that's important, I had to translate it. It basically means nothingness. So it's kind of interesting. The void will bleed nothing or nothingness. So we referenced one writer earlier in Desaad. I believe that was back in, if I'm not mistaken, was it Hedonist? Yeah, so that goes back to Hedonist. And then again, we get it here with Kafka. It's a 20th century writer, Franz Kafka. I'm going to shout out, actually, she's with the band here. I know I've done that before. Tori Kravitz does a phenomenal job over on that podcast, presented by Knotfest. You should really go check that out. And I went back and I actually listened to Tati's interview on there. She mentioned that she reads philosophy and it inspired her for certain songs and certain writings on this album. I'm not going to pretend that I know exactly what Kafka wrote, but I get the sense it's pretty dark. As in the song, Tati says, quote, "I showed my bare face. It was ripped off like a mask and they strapped down a throat of my own song. Unmasking comes in price. All that pure is compromised." I'm just getting, criticism or scrutiny from this, maybe feeling kind of like an outsider to the rest of society. That's my best guess here. And again, I think that the reason maybe it wasn't exactly my cup of tea, just instrumentally, musically, is, the expectations I maybe had after coming off of what I heard from Green Serpent. But still, it's definitely an interesting piece. We obviously get some more philosophy talked about here in this song. From there, we go on to Dark Bile, and this almost just feels angry, but also sad as well at the start. I think that's kind of the point, because this feels like it's just talking about kind of sadness and depression. We get Madame Melancholy, My Beauty in Blue, in the School of Moods, I've Mastered Sadness. Again, a really solid groove here, definitely a really creative way to kind of talk about sadness and depression. So another solid track on the album here for sure. From there, we move on to Fast Draw. I will say that this album is very different, and that almost every song, it feels like we have different pacing. And again, with this one, we're upbeat right away, and it's super intense. You can really hear the bass drums in this. I'm getting a really tense psychological battle almost going on here with this song. We can go back to Green Serpent and talk about, how alcohol use or abuse, make a comparison here in just addiction in general or bad habits, and how people, know they're doing something bad but still do it. There's a part of the song that states, "I find myself digging deeper, further down the hole, I'll one day come to know." I do like how the pacing slows down again towards the end, and how the heavy riffs are still throughout in the ending sequence. But overall, with the meaning of it, it's just, I feel like a really psychological battle going on in one's mind as they deal with, addiction. From there, we go on to Someone's Daughter. I'll start by saying, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this was the first single that was released, and that was back in early 2024. And I knew when I heard that song that this was going to be a great album. I love the bass here, and again, love Tati's vocal range. I'm getting from this is almost just an anthem about being a woman in a male-dominated world, especially in the final couple of verses in the song. She states, "I have the audacity to throw the first punch. I am no longer a daughter." I kind of view that as being young and vulnerable, and now she's saying basically, "I'm strong and I can stand up for myself." That doesn't necessarily mean being violent. It's just showing strength and being fearless in kind of terms of taking on the world. Absolutely love this song. Definitely my second favorite on the album so far, behind Green Serpent. One other note. Again, brilliant instrumentally. But before that final verse, we just get a great buildup of tension. It's almost chaotic as well. So, really, really good, really well done. Love Someone's Daughter. From there, we get to the last two albums on the record. Starting off with A Tongue So Fly. Even right away, we get those punchy riffs on this one. Admittedly, again, this one isn't necessarily one of my favorites on the album. But just talking about what this could mean a little bit from the lyrics, I just get the sense it's about someone telling lies about others, gossip, if you will. She states, they entertain a thought irrelevant. In triumphant tone, they scream their slander. Let the whispers fade. Let the truth prevail. So I think it's just kind of about, someone, gossiping about others and whatnot, and, how that can maybe hurt others. But yeah, not one of my favorites on the album, but still, a solid track here as we get towards the end. That leads us to our final track of the album, which is the title track, Duél. I know I've mentioned chaotic before on this album, and we get that again with the drum fills to start this last song. I don't know what I've liked more on this album, the bass or the drums, but Vlad and Eugene are both killing it. And that's no disrespect to, the guitars as well. Roman does a great job, but everything is great. It's just that the drums and the bass has really been the heroes on this album for me. We get a very similar feeling to Fast Raw and a lot of the album, honestly, which just another inner battle between oneself and trying to overcome personal demons. But this is a great song. Definitely another one of my favorites on the album. So my overall thoughts on this, I thought that there were some really great songs on here and there. My top three are definitely Green Serpent, Someone's Daughter, and Duél. It's funny because as I mentioned earlier, I could barely stand the harsher vocals with metal until like 3 or 4 years ago. But with this band, it's actually what I like the most. When they get into like their softer stuff, I don't want to say it bores me, but it almost like I'm not as into it for sure because I'm so used to, expecting the other stuff from them. I can respect the shifts, especially in the songs, and those are actually some of the songs I like the most is when we have those subtle shifts that aren't, completely opposite of one another, kind of like, Green Serpent. But one thing I'll say this is what continues to separate this band from so many other metalcore bands is that they never sacrifice their groove for heaviness. They can hit you with crushing riffs, brutal gutturals one moment, and then lock into those incredibly infectious grooves the next. I mean, it's so natural for them. That's one of the many things that keeps me coming back to this band. I don't know exactly where I would rank this for all their albums because I do like a lot of their works, but this is definitely a top 3 album of theirs for me. I'm going to go 8.25 out of 10. Some really great themes throughout. Tati continues to be one of the biggest badasses in metal, and she showcases it here too. And of course, this also reminded me just how incredible the rhythm section is. Eugene's bass, Vlad's drumming, outstanding throughout. Roman's riffs tie everything together. So definitely an album I would recommend, and especially those 3 songs, Green Serpent, Someone's Daughter, and Duél, really solid on the album too. So. Hey everyone, I'm Aaron Jackson, the host of Valkyrie Sessions. If you enjoyed this review, I'd love to invite you to check out the full podcast. Each week, we dive into everything happening in woman-focused rock and metal, from album reviews and band of the week to festival news, artist interviews, and the long-term vision behind Valkyrie Fest. You can watch full episodes every Friday right here on YouTube or listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'd love to have you join us. Until next time, keep it rockin', and I'll see you on Valkyrie Sessions.